of the hardest parts about writing a story is finding an ending that those who enjoy your story will enjoy. And unfortunately, this is an aspect of storytelling that evades a lot of storytellers, with stories like Naruto, Bleach, and Game of Thrones all coming to endings that the viewers and/or readers didn't find satisfactory. But there's not really one concrete reason as to why a storyteller is unable to finish their story in a way that's deemed satisfactory. Millions of different things can have an effect on somebody's ability to end a story. Their health could begin to waver, their publisher could rush them, or they could just not be good at finishing stories. You see, because in the writing world, there's two different kinds of writers. There's builders and there's closers. Builders are people like Oda and George R.R. Martin, people who are incredible at building fleshed out, complex, and beautiful universes. Closers are writers able to find a succinct point to close their story in a satisfying and meaningful way and do it over and over and over again. People like Stephen King or Hiromu Arakawa, but very rarely do we run into people who are able to accomplish both. People who are able to build some of the most gorgeous and complex universes we've ever seen and close those universes out in a way that doesn't feel rushed. Once in a lifetime talents like J.R.R. Tolkien. And recently, there's been some conversation brewing around the fact that one of the greater authors of our times, when it comes to manga, may not be the closer we all hoped he was. See, it was revealed to us in early 2022 by Horikoshi, the mangaka of My Hero Academia, that he hoped to finish the manga by the end of 2022. It is now January 18th as of this current filming, and it's still running. And while My Hero Academia could logically come to a close in the next 5 to 10 chapters, the My Hero Academia fandom would not be happy with that. You see, there seems to be a brewing storm of sentimentality on the internet that people believe that Horikoshi is rushing the end of My Hero Academia. But why would Horikoshi feel as though he had to rush something that he's taken years and years and years to create already? And why do people feel as though this ending is being rushed? And most importantly than all of that, is it truly being rushed? Well, we're gonna answer all those questions and more in a second here, guys, but first, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you guys don't want to see me rush to my own end, go ahead and follow my brand new podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. So, My Hero Academia. Love it or hate it, it's undeniable that it has been a mainstay in the manga and anime space for years. It is widely regarded by many to be the best new-gen anime out there. Clocking in at 377 action-packed chapters, it is an undeniable fun read. So why would Horikoshi, who's put his entire life's work into this manga for almost a decade, now decide to rush the ending? For that matter, is he even doing that? Well, in order to address the question of why he would possibly be rushing the ending, we would have to assume that he was in fact rushing the ending. So let's for 1 second assume that Horikoshi is hypothetically rushing the ending of My Hero Academia. Well, a mangaka rushing the ending of their manga is nothing new, unfortunately. People felt as though Naruto's ending was rushed, and I really can't disagree with them there. Madara ends up getting mopped up without his storyline coming to a logical conclusion by an entity that's existed in the background of the story for, I guess, the entirety of the story, and that's after Naruto and Sasuke get a power-up kind of out of nowhere that allows them to fight on Madara and then subsequently Kaguya's level. But really the best example of people agreeing that a manga was rushed is with Bleach, as almost everybody who's ever read Bleach widely agrees that the ending was rushed. However, that isn't the fault of the mangaka Tite Kubo at all. You see, Tite is a builder. He built an incredibly complicated and beautiful world with Bleach. And arguably, the 1,000-Year Blood War arc is his piece de resistance. The arc where all of the pieces come together, and all of those pieces come together to create our final Ichigo. We get introduced to things like the Soul King and the Return of the Quincy's, toys that have been dangled in front of us for hundreds of chapters. However, unfortunately, because Tite Kubo's manga was going on for so long, and unfortunately Bleach's numbers began to dip, Tite Kubo's publication company hurried him up, putting him on a timeline to finish Bleach's manga. And because of that, a lot of the toys that were dangled in front of us in earlier chapters we never really got to grab onto. And thus a mangaka being rushed by their publication company is one of the most common reasons we would see for a manga feeling as though it's being rushed. When a mangaka builds a robust and beautiful universe, they need a certain amount of time to close it in the way that they would want. However, if they're given a timeline that doesn't match up with the timeline that they had in their head, they have to sever some of the plot lines that they deem as non-necessary. And this is honestly a large possibility for Horikoshi. You see, Horikoshi has actually already publicly addressed the fact that when he stated that villains such as the League of Villains or the Paranormal Liberation Army were going to take steps forward in the plot, becoming some of the main characters in My Hero Academia, he claimed that the number of downloads and purchases in reads on My Hero Academia plummeted. And this hurt his feelings a lot because this was always Horikoshi's vision for the end of My Hero Academia. However, the problem with that being his vision for the ending is that he wasn't going to change it. Regardless of how his manga sells, he wants his manga to finish in the way that he envisioned. And thus, as villains have taken a step forward in the limelight of MHA, it's a possibility that its sales have gone down. And thus, his publishing company, much like Tite Kubo's publishing company, would hurry him up. The other possibility is, unfortunately, the reason a lot of mangakas have just never finished their mangas, and that could be health. It has become more and more apparent over the past couple of years that being a mangaka is brutal, especially a mangaka who has to produce a chapter of a manga every single week. Not only do you need to know the story you're telling, you also have to draw the entire thing, which is at minimum 14 pages of highly detailed content in 7 days. This has led to mangakas like Togashi, the mangaka of Hunter x Hunter and Yu Yu Hakusho, to taking massive amounts of time off, as producing a manga on a weekly basis breaks their body down. It's also led to things like Yusuke Murata, the mangaka of One Punch Man, saying, hey, chapters are gonna come out when I want them to come out. And Horikoshi, though he's never complained of physical ailment, has been through a lot mentally. I mean, you all know the My Hero fandom, right? Imagine being the guy responsible for the My Hero fandom. Man gets death threats because ships that people want aren't happening. Children quite literally end their lives because they believed that one of their favorite characters was dead. The mental toll of being responsible for the My Hero Academia fandom is one I cannot even imagine. So it's a possibility, in order to deal with the mental or physical ailments that he's dealing with as a mangaka who has to produce one of the most popular mangas on Earth on a weekly basis, has led him to be like,
I could be done with this.
I got hot. And the third and final reason that Horikoshi could possibly be rushing is because he doesn't want his manga to be as long as convoluted as other long and convoluted manga. Well, yes, it's incredible that Naruto jumps into the backstory of every character ever introduced, like Nagato and Kakashi and Obito. It's a possibility that Horikoshi doesn't want to write a manga like that. It's a possibility that Horikoshi doesn't believe that it's necessary to explore the motivations and history of every character introduced in the last 377 chapters. Because if hypothetically Horikoshi was to do a deep dive into all of the important characters in 1A and outside of 1A and 1B, do you know how long My Hero Academia would be? See, this is a point that I've brought up hundreds of times over the last couple of years. I've always said that one of the weaknesses of My Hero Academia is how many characters there is. My Hero Academia through and through is an ensemble anime, because like I stated earlier, there's been plot lines introduced from all of 1A, 1B, the teachers at UA, people outside of UA. We've been introduced to other high schools, we've been introduced to other programs in UA, like the business program and the support program. And the problem is, when millions of people are reading your story, any character that you introduce will eventually be somebody's favorite, especially when we're talking about an ensemble anime, because within the confines of an ensemble anime, you have every type of person, you have every trope, every power, every personality, and every single person enjoys different things in their anime characters. Do you like a broody, older adult teacher vibe? Well, then you're gonna love Aizawa. Do you love a Dami Mommy? Then you're gonna love Miss Midnight. Do you like just the worst character ever? Then you're gonna love Mineta. But the problem is, when people glom onto favorites, they expect their favorites to get screen time. But when you release a cast that's as large as the one that MHA has released, that is impossible. Arguably, the gold standard for fleshing out your side characters is Black Clover. We know the histories, motivations, and side stories of every single one of the members of the Black Bulls. And when you consider the fact that after this last arc in the manga is completed, the Black Clover will probably end up being anywhere between 210 and 240 episodes, they will have accomplished effectively fleshing out every single character from the Black Bulls. And then obviously there's a couple of other characters that they've sprinkled in the backstories of in there, like William Vengeance, Yuno, Nozel, Marileona, Fuegoleon. All in all, we probably got the comprehensive backstory of 15 to 17 people in Black Clover. And like I said, Black Clover is the gold standard. Shows like Naruto have only ever really given us a look into the lives of Hinata, Neji, Rock Lee, Naruto, Kakashi, Nagato, Obito, probably close to 12 to 14 characters. And within this, I believe we have a sweet spot. 12 to 18 characters that I can actually care about. And obviously that number either gets bigger or smaller depending on the number of episodes. But here's the problem. My Hero Academia will probably be max 160 episodes. So in less time than Black Clover is currently, which is 170 episodes, My Hero Academia is supposed to flesh out the backstories of almost double the amount of characters that Black Clover has. And while yes, obviously My Hero Academia has definitely spent more time focusing on some characters than others, that's just the way it goes. We've gotten detailed backstories from All Might, Endeavor, Shoto, Bakugo, Deku. We've gotten looks into the motivations of Shigaraki and Dabi. We understand why All For One is trying to become the Demon Lord. Aizawa and Present Mike have gotten their time with Kurogiri. All in all, we've gotten the backstory of a lot of the characters within My Hero Academia, but that's really not where the majority of the complaints are coming from. See, while we have gotten the backstories of a lot of these characters, people want to see a closing to these stories, a logical rounding off to bring these stories to a head, amongst other things, which is why I'm going to go through the gripes that I've seen the most on the internet and establish whether or not I genuinely believe they're a product of Horikoshi rushing or just the way that he wants to write the story. So honestly, the most common gripe that I've seen about this final arc of the manga online is the lack of the fleshing out of the Heteromorph arc. For those of you who aren't caught up with the manga, don't worry, I'm not going to be spoiling things here. I'm going to be talking in very general terms. So generally speaking, the Heteromorph arc happened relatively recently. Now this arc follows Shoji and Koda, also known as Annie Voice and Dupla Arms. And the term heteromorph refers to those whose quirks have altered their appearance. See, it's revealed to us during the Heteromorph arc that heteromorphs are actually discriminated against in society because of the way they look. And this isn't just a problem in UA or hero high schools, it's all across the globe. Heteromorphs are bullied and spit on and viewed as scum. They are essentially treated as lesser than simply based off the way they look. Since to a lot of people, they look less than human. In this arc, Shoji and Koda are defending a building against another evil heteromorph. And this evil heteromorph is leading an army of heteromorphs who are rallying against the hero society. The Paranormal Liberation Army has essentially radicalized all of the heteromorphs in a certain area into believing that if they burn down society, heteromorphs can rise to equality. There are very, and I mean very real parallels between this in the real world. And this is probably the first time that Horikoshi has ever dipped his inkwell into real life problems. And it was really cool to see Horikoshi approach a problem like this, a problem like systemic racism. However, this problem is not only introduced, but resolved in 6 chapters. And in those 6 chapters, we're not just having a conversation about whether or not heteromorphs deserve to be discriminated against, there's also a fight in there. People's real problem with the length of this arc is twofold. One, this is kind of the first time we've ever gotten any kind of character development for either Koda or Shoji. And two, if you're gonna dip into a massive problem like systemic racism, flesh it out. And without going exactly into the details of what happens during this arc, essentially Shoji and Koda are able to be like,
Hey, listen, we're heteromorphs too.
And a couple of heteromorphs in the crowd are like,
You know what? This is wrong.
and they put down their swords. Which doesn't necessarily address the root of the issue. It is very Martin Luther King, where they say we can't break the system, we have to fix the system. But how fast they come to this conclusion and the means by which they come to this conclusion is what people have a problem with. And to that degree, I agree. I believe if you're gonna wade into the deep waters of covering systemic racism in your universe, do the whole thing. Give an entire arc to a heteromorph trying to break the system because of what they went through as a child or as an adult. Don't make a problem like systemic racism in your universe a side note, a stepping stone to the final arc. Something with material that heavy deserves to be fleshed out to its fullest. But do I believe that this arc was created through rushing? No. See, well, like I've just stated, I would have much preferred that this arc be 30, 40 chapters long. I don't believe that Horikoshi waded into the waters of systemic racism to talk about systemic racism. I think Horikoshi saw on the horizon that he has to finish this manga soon, and he's done absolutely nothing with Koda or Shoji, when almost every single other character in Class 1A, except of course Sato, Ashido, Ojiro, and Sero, has gotten some kind of plot development. And even Ashido got a little bit of plot development because there was that whole like she can dance thing. And thus Horikoshi, somewhat unfortunately, decided that the best way to give these two characters, who both happen to be heteromorph, screen time was to introduce a compelling and shared plot line that they could both work against. And in that regard, since we're talking about Koda and Shoji here, they don't need 20 or 30 chapters. Well, of course, it would be cool, like I've said earlier, if every single character got a huge fleshed out backstory. Let's be real, Shoji and Koda are background characters. The fact that we even got a little bit of an explanation about what happened in Shoji and Koda's life through the discrimination they had as heteromorphs is good enough for me. Would I have liked to have a story of them separated from just the fact that they are heteromorphs? Absolutely. This kind of ties into the black suffering trope that we see in a lot of movies, where primarily led black movies that tell black stories are usually about black suffering. This is unfortunate because there's so many incredible and empowering black stories that don't have to do with systemic racism or just systemic suffering. So if we could have got a story about Shoji and Koda that wasn't tied into their race, that would have been great. But do I think that this was done because of a rush? I mean, I guess sort of, because if hypothetically Horikoshi was going to make My Hero Academia 700 chapters, he would have had a ton of time to go over both Shoji and Koda. But this isn't rare, especially in manga. You see, within the confines of a lot of manga, and I'm talking manga here because filler episodes in anime will usually give some characters a fleshed out backstory, usually only the main characters and those closest to the main characters get their stories told. The real reason that we got to look into a lot of different character stories throughout Naruto is because of technically filler content. Everything we know about Hagoromo, Hamura, a lot of the stuff we know about Kakashi and Minato, all of it's filler. And My Hero just doesn't really have filler. But unfortunately, the lack of character development doesn't stop with Shoji and Koda, as My Hero Academia also suffers from a little thing I like to call plot device characters. These are characters that have been introduced over the course of the 370 chapters that the manga has run that truly only exist to move the plot forward. Characters like Stars and Stripes in the manga or Whirlwind in the anime. Whirlwind, also known as Inase Yorashi. But I'm not even just talking about Whirlwind, I'm talking about the characters represented by Whirlwind. Characters who have been introduced from other classes or other schools or other programs that probably aren't going to be seen again. These characters are plot device characters. Characters who play a crucial role in the arc they're a part of and then disappear. The best example of these characters is pretty much the entirety of Class 1B outside of Monoma. Well, characters like the Vine Girl and the Mushroom Girl, whose names are escaping me currently, have been seen in the War arc. By and large, these characters, who we may find interesting because Horikoshi is very good at writing interesting characters, only appear to move a certain arc forward in a direction that Horikoshi wants it to go in. And the placement of all of these plot device characters upsets people, as like I said earlier, any character that you introduce is bound to be someone's favorite eventually. Everybody wants to see what their favorite character is up to. So is the fact that we're not seeing the heroes from Shiketsu or 1B really involved in the final arc a problem of rushing or a problem of them just being plot device characters? Well, once again, unfortunately, this conversation could go either way. Is it technically lazier writing to introduce characters that people get attached to and then never use them again? A little bit. But is this problem probably more systemic of the fact that Horikoshi just writes interesting characters that you get attached to and therefore want to see the story of, when the average mangaka probably wouldn't give you that anyways? Also maybe. See, when you put MHA next to things like Black Clover or Naruto, it seems like these side characters kind of just disappear. But this is largely to do with the wishy-washy nature of MHA. See, in Naruto, there's really three main bad guys: the Akatsuki, Orochimaru, and Danzo, sort of. And we get a variation of these bad guys that serve as the motivation for the plot to move forward for almost the entirety of Naruto. And Black Clover is almost exactly the same, as the bad guys in Black Clover is usually just a different mixing of devils. Where MHA differs itself from this is the fact that in every arc there's a new set of bad guys. Well, obviously the League of Villains is a vein throughout the entirety of the show. There's things like the sports festival where all of the classes in UA battle against each other, which introduced us to dozens of new characters. There's things like the provisional license test where characters from other schools came to UA. There's hero associations where every single hero has a sidekick. There's every teacher at UA. There's teachers outside of UA. The best way I can explain this is, imagine if the Konoha 12 was given to us and we had the Konoha 12 for one arc, but then we found out there was 4 other Konoha 12s. And there's also the Suna 12 and the Ame 12, and they come to Konoha to battle against Konoha. I mean, even in the Chunin exams, which is the closest facsimile we have to something like that happening, how many of the characters outside of the original Chunin exams stuck around? Gaara, Tamari, Kankuro. That's it. So I ask again, is the fact that we're not seeing the end of these characters' story a product of rushing or a product of there just being too many characters? I have to go with the latter. Though the introduction of characters this late in the game like Stars and Stripe, who are incredibly interesting characters who just get used as very, very blatant plot device characters. The real meat of the problem appears to be, however, the Vigilante arc. Now, this is the arc that takes place after the war arc. It's a 2 to 4 week span where all of Class 1A goes back to UA to lick their wounds after the war. But during this time, Deku was out and about wrangling up all of the villains that are broken out of prison. And we see next to nothing of this. Pretty much the entirety of this arc is laser focused on Deku. And while it's a really interesting growth moment for Deku where we actually get to see the burden that becoming the true symbol of peace has put on him, and we get to see All Might grappling with the fact that he placed that burden on Deku's shoulders, in this arc it becomes very, and I mean very clear that this manga is about Deku, as it's only Deku that we get to see grapple with pretty much the post-traumatic stress disorder of the war. On top of this, during the Vigilante arc, Deku takes a big step forward in terms of strength, being able to use basically all of the quirks of the past inheritors of One For All, to the degree that he's basically able to use One For All at 100% capacity. And this is another one of the chief complaints. People feel as though Deku's power scaling was rushed, that we never really got to see him train in these new techniques like Danger Sense or Fajin. But earlier in the manga, we got to see him very intricately train with things like Shoot Style. And on all of the points I just previously listed, I agree. This is a system of being rushed. This is actually borderline unacceptable. The war arc is inarguably one of the most important arcs in MHA. It is a full-on battle between good and evil, with both sides giving it their all, and evil wins. Not only does evil win, the hero system is basically destroyed. Numerous top heroes and important characters to the timeline are killed in front of children, and we never see what that does to them. We never see any of the students of UA grappling with the fact that they stumbled upon Miss Midnight's body. We simply get to watch Deku as he jets around the city catching heroes like Muscular, who broke out of prison. And a couple of weeks after being a vigilante, after all of the students in UA have gotten over the emotional trauma of the war arc, Deku rejoins them. So not only does the power scaling feel rushed, but an incredible opportunity to flesh out important side characters and how they feel after the war arc and what the war arc has done to them was missed, though skipped would be a better word. And unfortunately, character development being stunted isn't only a problem amongst heroes, as I believe genuinely the person suffering the most from this manga being rushed is Toga. Toga is one of the more interesting characters in MHA as a whole, though I do wish as a character with a blood quirk, much like Stain, that she would act a bit more like Stain, as of course the woman with a blood quirk has to kind of be a crazy yandere. Her motivations for acting the way that she does are kind of compelling. See, Toga's brain is kind of miswired. When she loves somebody, she just wants to be them. Toga found herself falling in love with Uraka and, more importantly, Deku, and therefore she had a moral conundrum about fighting against them because she wanted to be them. And what could have very easily been fleshed out as an opportunity for either Deku or Uraka to talk to Toga and possibly pull her out of the darkness or make her better understand that she could be accepted in society as long as she didn't act upon her desires, or that her perception of normalcy being warped isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just something that she has to understand differs from those around her. And if Uraka and or Deku was able to accept her for who she is, she could have been brought into the fold. Upon having basically half of a conversation with both of them, Toga just decides, you know what, nope, I'm a bad guy. And while I do not mind her heading that direction at all, the path there kinda sucked. In fact, I would largely prefer that Toga does end up a bad guy. I appreciate that Toga is separating her goals and desires from a man in Deku, and she's just operating as an entity doing what she wants to. But the way that she got there, I do not like. And the last complaint that I believe isn't totally idiotic about this final arc is that people want more Shigaraki. People believe as though Shigaraki has been the true bad guy built up through the entirety of MHA. But because he now kind of shares a consciousness with All For One, Shigaraki is being overshadowed. And while I understand the sentimentality because Shigaraki is a much more compelling villain than All For One, inherently, it's a bad take. The reason that Shigaraki is a more compelling bad guy than All For One for a lot of people is because Shigaraki isn't really a bad guy. He's a confused child, and that's a plot line they're building. Multiple times after fusing for All For One, the real Shigaraki has broken out of Shigaraki, lashing out against Deku, claiming that he has plenty of friends, and then going on to list his childhood friends. And the whole plot line of Shigaraki being in there is a core part of the final arc, because I can almost guarantee you the way that the manga is gonna end is that Deku reaches the Shigaraki inside of Shigaraki. Shigaraki realizes he doesn't want to be the demon god and he rebels against All For One, and then a weakened All For One has to battle against Deku as Shigaraki rips at him from the inside, and then Deku and the rest of the heroes are finally able to finish One For All. It was all because of Shigaraki, who's gonna be forgiven for everything that he's done and brought into the fold. I put everything on that. Only difference is maybe Shigaraki dies. But if you don't believe that Deku's gonna reach inside of Shigaraki and pull out the child and save him, you're tripping. So the reason that we're not getting more Shigaraki is because Shigaraki has to disappear to reappear. And also in chapter 377, he regained consciousness overall for one, so he's actually gonna be the one battling against Deku now. Now for the last two gripes that I do think are idiotic. People are upset that the pro heroes that we lost during the war arc haven't been mourned. It seems as though important characters are gone and most definitely forgot. And the reason that I believe this take is idiotic is because they'll mourn them at the end. Yes. Obviously, if they had gone into what Class 1A went through after the war arc, this would have been a fantastic opportunity to reflect on those who were lost. But they didn't do that. So they'll probably do it at the end. If they don't, this is not an idiotic take. You're absolutely right. Heroes like Miss Midnight and Spectral and Crust just died, and then they were like,
Okay, thanks for that.
oh, by the way, I'm doing anime spoilers. If you're not caught up, I'm sorry. And the last and most idiotic of all of the gripes is that people are upset that Eri mastered her ability to rewind time and we didn't see it. Listen, I understand that Eri is cute. I think she's adorable, but Eri's not even learning how to master her rewind quirk for the main character. Yes, of course, the character that Eri is mastering her rewind quirk for is widely beloved. But what, did you want 3 to 4 chapters of Eri rewinding wounds on lizards to master her quirk? Actually, I'm sure tons of people would want that. But it's unnecessary. Yes, it would have been cool to have a little bit of build up, like occasionally it gets hinted at the fact that Eri's getting better with her quirk, and not kind of just toss it in there out of nowhere in one of the most important arcs in MHA's history. But we didn't need an Eri training arc. So in conclusion, is My Hero Academia being rushed? The answer is unfortunately, yes. And we don't necessarily know why. Is it because of the publishers or the dip in sales or Horikoshi's health? But what we do know is it's really not as bad as people are making it out to be. Is every single character gonna get their happy ending, their pretty bow? Absolutely not. There is way too many characters for that ever to happen. There's 20 characters in Class 1A alone, and that's not including Aizawa, All Might, or Miss Midnight. Unfortunately, a pretty well fleshed out ending for every single character was just never gonna happen. What will happen though is we'll get the conclusion of the story for All for One, and All Might, and Shigaraki, and Deku, and Shoto, and Bakugo, for Aizawa, for Present Mike, for Kurogiri, and a couple of other key characters. So once again, I'll reiterate, is there things that I would have loved Horikoshi to spend more time on? Absolutely. We deserved a full Heteromorph arc, and we deserved to know what Class 1A, and everybody for that matter, went through after the war. But are we owed a pretty pink bow on every single of the hundreds of characters we've been introduced to throughout the duration of MHA? Absolutely not. Trying to close the book on dozens of storylines simultaneously is exactly the reason we haven't gotten the last Game of Thrones book. It is almost an impossible task. So sit back, relax, and be thankful you're getting an end at all, because I've been waiting for the end of Hunter x Hunter for 4.5 years. It could be a whole lot worse. And that's it, guys. Do you believe that MHA's ending is being rushed? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Kind of like the dichotomy of my own personality, where like I'm an ardent defender of My Hero Academia on YouTube, but I'm its biggest hater on TikTok.